Yeah, hi all. Lucky enough to be speaking with Joeann Calabrese, who's a filmmaker behind This Is Not the Time to Be a Human, and Paul Mills, aka Poez.
Yes.
I'm glad I got that right. Thank you for taking the time to join me.
Pleasure.
No, you're welcome. And the nominations for Fusion Film Festivals, the London edition. For those that don't know, that we have spoken before, I'm really intrigued by this film. I love this film. I love actually the work that Joeann's done. And Joann, would you mind telling us what this? Can I call it a short documentary? I'm really struggle with the right description for this film.
Yes, it's not an easy one to classify, so that works fine.
And could you tell us what or perhaps Paul, tell us what the synopsis of the story is?
Sure. Well, Paul and I have been working together for a few years, and I've really gotten to know his music and his brilliant songs. And he was performing one night. Actually, it was November 16th, 2016. It was an evening of the vice presidential debates, and he was performing in a club. I had gone down to his gig, and when he was playing in the song, "This Is Not the Time," the words were really very relevant to what was happening on the street in New York City at that time. People were very concerned about the way that the election was progressing in regard to the debates, both presidential and vice presidential debates. And so after that gig, Paul had the soundtrack for his performance with the band, and we started collaborating on some visuals to help us sort of put some visuals to the way we were feeling around what was happening on the streets at the time. And when this film was made, we were not. This was before the election was finalized. It was before Trump became president. But at that time, we were still feeling like things may be going a little bit awry. And so, as the months progressed, we wanted to put something together, sort of tell the story not only of Paul's beautiful song, but also of what was happening on the street, which was basically people were protesting, people weren't protesting. So there was a variance of things. And so I was at a Trump protest rally, and I shot some footage there of what was happening, captured some sounds. And also, as time went on, we started to think about what was happening on the street. It was sort of a reminder to us of what was happening during the civil rights movement back in the 60s. So we started to leverage some of that footage. And so it all sort of came together in a very nice package. And folks like yourself are very interested in talking to us about it. So again, thanks for the invitation.
You're
Paul,
welcome.
what would you like to add to that?
No, I think you've summarized it very well. I think anybody who didn't hear the previous interview is now completely up to date.
Thank you. And it's funny because when I say funny, this is kind of a dark humour, and what I mean by that is this could almost be a sequel to the interview we had previously, because so much has happened with the Trump presidency. I kind of don't know where to begin, and it's almost like if you wrote a script, it would be thrown out because no one would quite believe it. It's almost like a revolving door of people getting fired, of disbelief, lies, untruths, and it's quite phenomenal what's actually happening. I mean, believe me, we can't. So we've got Brexit, for Christ's sake. So, but it's almost insane. It's literally hard to believe what's actually happening on your side of the pond.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of focus on the aspects of this historical moment that you've focused on, but I think what is so frightening and disturbing to us here is not just that we have elected a president who is acting to harm the United States, to weaken it and humiliate it and damage it as much as possible. But also we are learning that there are so many Americans who applaud that, who act against the interests of the United States and its fundamental beliefs. It's as if after all these years of struggle to try and fortify and clarify the interests of the United States in democracy, in equality, in human rights, in compassion, and serving or trying to serve as a model for the rest of the world and an aid to the rest of the world in those goals, we find out that many Americans are fed up with this idea, this dream of America, and they found their hero in somebody who hates America and hates democracy and hates human rights and is dedicated to cruelty and callousness in the most naked way. And they are staunch supporters of it, no matter how often his statements are proved false or how much money he costs the country in pursuing these goals. No matter how clearly he is allied with enemies of the United States and of Western Europe, they're all in with this individual. And it turns out that a great many Americans really don't much care for human rights. And that's what's most shocking about it, the support that he's received and continues to receive. You know, his as all the scandals progress that you've been describing, his support numbers remain the same.
It's incredible.
40% of the American people and 80% of the Republican Party see nothing wrong with any of this.
And yeah, what's actually, because I'm really interested in politics, and I've been keeping an eye on the numbers with Pelosi coming in for the Democrats, and obviously all the controversy over the wall. And those numbers have taken a bit of a battering, I think, haven't they?
Well, I'm not talking about over 50% of Americans supporting the Donald, or 50% of Americans supporting what the Republicans seek to do at this point. And all that we've seen in the midterms, I think, is that Americans who stayed at home in 2016 have bothered to come out and vote. And that's really not a reflection of, I don't think, a reflection really of any change in anyone's views. It's just those who have always been opposed to Trump have become active. What's been battered here is the Republican efforts to suppress the vote. In spite of their efforts at voter suppression, Democrats have come out and voted and elected just the sort of people you would have expected them to elect after 8 years of Obama, who remains the most popular president in living memory. Thank you,
Paul. And also, Paul, this I don't want to embarrass you, but I'm going to read you a quote here about you that was on the film Freeway, which is wonderful, and it kind of ties into what I'm going to ask you about the next question, because it says on here, the New York Times are called a spoken word pioneer. I read that, and then that's an amazing statement. I started thinking of people like Jack Kerouac and people of that ilk. So in order to get to be called that, then clearly you are very artistic. And can you explain how it is that you were drawn to make this film with Joeann?
Yes, Joeann and I are trying to be pioneers in the sense that we are fashioning a form of art that combines music and the sort of performance poetry I pioneered with cinema. Mm. And Joeann is very committed to this and very, very gifted in realizing this vision. And the short documentary that you're talking about is really one of the best examples of that kind of new form of poetry and cinema and music combined with performance. So Joeann first did some wonderful work with an earlier song called The Monotone. And that doesn't involve keyboards or jazz accompaniment. But when we put together this show at the bitter end here in New York City, she was on the spot and really captured the spirit of it in the intercut footage of protest in the streets.
When you this is a question. Thank you for that, Paul. This is a question for Joann. Joann, I'm kind of when Paul was explaining that, I was kind of thinking how things have changed, obviously, particularly with social media. With the internet, where I'm not saying everything is becoming not unified, but it's changing. Obviously, changing massively. Everyone wants something instantaneous. Everyone wants to be entertained quickly, and yet cinema, music, art, writing, poetry are kind of morphing. This is my opinion, in a different way because it has changed. It has changed everything, hasn't it? The ground is shifting. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to ask is what's your opinion about how that change is affecting everything?
It's funny because I think a lot of it is just that the internet and social media sort of brings a different lens to all this work that's been going on for years. I mean, when you think about people, showing silent films, and there's a piano player or there's an orchestra playing. So I think it's always been happening. Maybe more in a place like New York City than other places. But I think the other part of social media is that people are finding each other. So it's much easier to connect to people who may have an interest in doing things like making an art film that has a political message or something like that. I mean, so I think there's a connected piece of that where people can find each other a little bit more often. I mean, I love collaborating with people all over the world, and I usually find them through some shared blogs or shared Facebook pages or something like that. So that's probably a little bit of a difference. But I think the work of the form itself, may have evolved a little bit with the new technology. Some of the work is easier to get to. I do a lot of work in researching archive material, and it's easier to do that now versus years ago. So things like that make it more accessible to people. But I think overall, for the most part, the art form has always existed. It's just the way that it's being presented and shared, I think, across the world now.
And because of course things are moving so quickly, with Trump, of course, it would be very easy to, I assume, to make a film to kind of shine a spotlight on what's happened over the last couple of years, because there has been, even in that short time frame, you could easily make a kind of a sequel, inverted commas, to this film, couldn't you? Because even what you talk about in this film has actually gone way beyond what anyone would possibly believe.
Well, it's interesting what Paul was saying about how we've sort of had this realization around the certain population of Americans who feel a certain way, and that Trump has really tapped into that. So it's not about Trump as much. And by the way, he is temporary, where I know Brexit could be a much lower impact to your country. That's a whole other conversation. But so it's more about the people and Americans and how we're thinking about each other and how we're treating each other versus about Trump per se. So you're correct in saying that a lot of things have changed, a lot of things have moved. There are a lot of positives when you think about the midterm election results. And so when I think about what I want to say about what's been transpired, I don't really want to. I don't want to even talk about Trump. I want to look past him. And even I think one of the reasons why people like our film so much as well is that we don't have a picture of him in the film at all.
No.
I really wanted to focus on what people were feeling and sort of the link to the un-American activities, the HUAC committee meetings in the 1960s and things like that, and talk about what's happening with the people. How are the people shifting? What are they thinking about? What are they talking about? Where is the civil discourse in this country? What's happening in the civil discourse? Where is it happening? And things like that. So I think as far as a follow-up to this, it wouldn't be about him per se, but more about how our country is evolving and overall to test of our democracy. I mean, we have systems in place, based upon our Constitution that allows certain things to happen. I mean, the shift in power after the midterms is really, we're starting to see that. We're starting to see how the conversation's changing. So I think, that makes a big difference, I think. Paul, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
Well, I would say that we can certainly talk about how the internet and or social media have changed the landscape as far as artistic expression, particularly of political values and political circumstances are concerned. But there are other revolutionary trends happening now that it's easy to overlook for a moment, I suppose, which also are very dramatically affecting the tenor of the discourse. One of those things is the rise of so-called reality television, which is itself a ramification of the miniaturization of the means for recording video and audio in high definition, which enables the producers of these programs to capture what they are capturing and to represent it as something that purports to be real. And of course, Trump is very much an exponent of that trend. Also, these changes in the means of production have made it possible for people like Joann and I to create video recordings at all, not to mention disseminating them globally. For example, when I was beginning to develop this form of performance poetry, I was quickly approached by different television studios to capture what I was doing. But in those days, a video camera was the size of a refrigerator, and everything had to take place in a sound studio with trained personnel, and then be broadcast using the same studio and broadcast systems, which also required a great investment of money as well as energy and time. Whereas today, we, along with everybody else, are as free to generate these products as I was when I would be performing on the street. And a vast audience is exposed to this and has the opportunity of listening to it. So, as I was saying before, one of the shocking results of this is that we have heard from people who were previously suppressed. The media like to pretend that the fringe right, the borderline fascist elements in our own society were some kind of fringe, maybe 5 or 10%. If you go back and look at the television and film from the 50s or the 60s, the angry racists are represented as one guy in town who has to be taught a lesson. But with the wresting of control over the media from those who would filter it and serve us with a happy vision of a balanced society which is progressing towards freedom, we begin to learn that there are, nearly half of our country is very angry and really not committed to the idea of equality. We began to see that, as Joann is explaining, in the 50s, and the country, in the North at least, was shocked to see the violent hatred expressed towards Martin Luther King and other protesters. Then we began to see in the McCarthy era that even in Washington, D.C. and all over the country, there was support for this xenophobia about communists. And today, those sorts of people are free to express their opinions. And of course, now they're hearing from each other. Once upon a time, somebody who nurtured these feelings and this worldview could be deceived by the media into thinking that they were isolated and abnormal, and maybe they could find a few friends to put together a local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. But today, if somebody wants to tweet their hatred, they find that there are hundreds of thousands or millions of people who are avid supporters, and this is what Trump discovered, and this is what he has managed to channel
and tapped into. Absolutely. And just finally, because I know I'd like to finish on a positive, I'm sure we can. And thank you so much for your time. So I know the election's a little bit away yet. We're looking at the end of next year, but what's your feelings?
Oh, about what's going to happen in 2020?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's naive to think it's going to be easy to defeat an incumbent. We learned that with Bush Jr.
Yeah.
No matter what the scandals were, no matter how incompetent he was, people are very, very reluctant to admit they made a mistake. And it's going to take something really powerful to offset that. And Democrats are going to have to get much more organized than they are at present. They're going to have to make a very concerted effort to overcome voter suppression and to overcome the financial inequality which funds the interests of hate. And there's just no telling how it's going to turn out in the next election. At least people are no longer deceived. A lot of people stayed home because they thought that the Democratic victory was a given. Right. But nobody believes that now. They understand that a lot is at stake.
Yeah. Thank you. And Joann?
Yeah, no, well said, Paul. I mean, I agree with you. I'm hopeful that Trump will not be around to be running in 2020, meaning that he will be not in office, that something will happen with the Mueller investigation or something where he would have to step down. That's my hope, that he's just not the person running. I guess Pence would then be running, but I'm hoping that it's not him, mostly because I just want everyone to stop talking about what Trump is saying. I'm tired of hearing about. I can't get away from it. I mean, I understand he's the president, and the media needs to cover everything he's saying, but every syllable, everything, and it's a lot. And he's the president, so he's got probably the biggest microphone in the world right now. So it's a little bit of a journey between now and then. So we'll see what happens, but I'm hopeful that there'll be something going on with the Mueller investigation or something that will turn up.
Believe me, if you think you've got it bad, you imagine how bad it is. Every other word over here is Brexit. It's just horrendous, honestly.
And it's coming to a head now.
It is, well, kind of. We hope so. I mean, I just pray, God forbid, I understand we're probably going to leave, but I just don't want it to be a no deal, because that would be so damaging. It would be so horrific. I can't see that happening, but, we need an end game. It's just going on and on. It's moving so slowly, and they're permanently at each other's throats. They just can't move forward, and I just hope it all finishes. But there we go. Anyway, that was me hoping to get an end on a positive, and I just said a negative about Brexit. But I'm sure it will sort itself out in the next 8 or 10 weeks. So as always, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
I've said to you, I think both of you before, you're fantastic to speak to, so articulate and so interesting. I could literally sit over a glass of wine and chat to you all night, and it's just so enjoyable. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
good luck with the festival.
Thank you, and good luck to both of you, and take care.
Bye.
You too.
Bye-bye.